They built monuments that touched the sky. They ruled as gods on earth. But they died like mortals, and sometimes their deaths left behind more questions than answers. Mummies can tell us a lot. We can see broken bones, signs of disease, even the last meal they ate. But a mummy can't tell us who pushed them. It can't tell us what poison was used. It can't describe the political plot that ended a dynasty. For every pharaoh whose death is a closed case, there are others whose final moments are shrouded in mystery. We have a king with a slit throat, but did his enemies get to him before the executioner did? We have a boy king with a broken leg, but was it a simple accident or something more sinister? We have a powerful queen who vanished from history, her name erased from stone. Did she die peacefully or was she removed? These aren't just old stories. They are cold cases, thousands of years old. The evidence is scarce. The witnesses are long dead. But with new technology like DNA testing and CT scans, we are peeling back the layers of linen and lies. We are trying to solve the oldest murder mysteries in the world. And what we're finding is that the world of the pharaohs was a lot more dangerous than we ever imagined. So what really happened to them? Let's look at the evidence. Number 22 was Ramesses XI, a prisoner in his own kingdom. Ramesses XI was the last king of the New Kingdom. That's a heavy title. The New Kingdom was Egypt's golden age. It was the time of Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, and Ramesses the Great. It was an era of empire, wealth, and power. And Ramesses XI was the man on the throne when it all fell apart. His death isn't a mystery because we found a body with strange wounds. It's a mystery because he just sort of disappears. His reign was pure chaos. Egypt was splitting in two. In the south, at Thebes, the high priests of Amun were becoming more powerful than the pharaoh himself. A man named Herihor was a general and the high priest. He started writing his name in a cartouche, the special oval reserved only for kings. That was a bold move. It was like a governor declaring himself president. In the north, Ramesses XI was ruling from his capital, but his power barely reached beyond the city limits. The country was in a state of undeclared civil war. During this time, something unthinkable happened. The Valley of the Kings, the sacred burial ground of the pharaohs, was being systematically robbed. Not just by a few thieves in the night. This was organized, high officials were involved. It's documented in trial records on papyri. They were stripping the gold from the mummies of the greatest kings in history to pay soldiers and buy food. It was a sign of total breakdown. The state was eating its own past to survive. So where was Ramesses XI in all this? He was king for about 30 years, but in the last decade of his reign, the official records from Thebes stopped mentioning him. They start dating things by the repeating of births, a new era declared by the high priests. It was as if the pharaoh in the north no longer mattered. He started a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, known today as KV4. But it was never finished, and he wasn't buried there. We don't know where he was buried. We have never found his mummy. Did he die of old age, a forgotten man in his northern palace? Or was his end more violent? In a time of civil war and widespread tomb robbing, a king without real power was a king in danger. Herihor, the powerful priest, likely took full control of the south. Another man named Smendes took control of the north after Ramesses XI died. The New Kingdom was over. The third intermediate period, a time of division and weakness, had begun. The mystery of Ramesses XI is the mystery of his kingdom's collapse. He didn't just die, his entire world died with him. His death certificate was the end of an empire. What really happened in his final years? Was he under a kind of house arrest by his own officials? Did the high priest Herihor just wait for him to die? Or did he help things along? And where is his body, the last pharaoh of Egypt's greatest age? Is it lying in an unmarked grave somewhere, or was it destroyed in the chaos he failed to control? Number 21. Did Pepi II's long life curse his kingdom? Pepi II of Menkaure ruled Egypt for a very, very long time. According to the ancient historian Manetho, he reigned for 94 years. He came to the throne as a little boy, maybe 6 years old. He died an old man, close to 100. He is often cited as the longest reigning monarch in human history. You would think a long, stable reign would be a good thing. But for Pepi II, it might have been a disaster. His death is a mystery because it's tied to the complete collapse of the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders. For decades, his reign seemed to be business as usual. Egypt was stable. Trade expeditions were sent out. But as Pepi II got older and older, problems started to grow. Power was slipping away from the central government, the Pharaoh's court. It was flowing to the provincial governors, the nomarchs. These local leaders started building elaborate tombs for themselves in their own home provinces, not near the king's pyramid. They were acting like little kings. Their inscriptions talk about their own accomplishments, not the pharaohs. Then there's the climate. Scientific studies of sediment from the Nile and geological data from the region suggest that a period of severe drought hit Egypt right around the end of Pepi II's reign. Less water in the Nile meant failed harvests. Failed harvests meant famine. Famine meant social unrest. A government is only as strong as its ability to feed its people. Imagine being an Egyptian at that time. The king has been on the throne your entire life. Your father's entire life. Maybe even your grandfather's. He's a permanent fixture, an ancient god king. But he is also a very old man. Is he still powerful enough to keep the gods happy? Is he strong enough to make the Nile flood? When the droughts came, people might have seen his extreme old age as a sign of the country's weakness. When Pepi II finally died, the whole system fell apart. The period that followed is called the First Intermediate Period. It was a time of chaos, civil war, and famine. The central government was gone. The local warlords fought for control. A text from this period, the Admonitions of Epure, describes the horror. The land is full of gangs. A man goes to plow with his shield. Forsooth, the river is blood. So, how did Pepi II die? He almost certainly died of old age. That's not the mystery. The mystery is what his death triggered. Did he hold on to power for too long, refusing to let a younger heir take over? Did all his potential heirs die of old age before he did, leaving a succession crisis? Did the country just rot from the inside out under a king who was too old and tired to manage it? The end of his reign was so catastrophic that it ended an entire era of Egyptian history. Was Pepi II a victim of his own longevity? Did the nomarchs simply, stop listening to the senile old king in the capital? Or was it the climate that delivered the final blow, a natural disaster that no pharaoh, young or old, could have stopped? Did the Egyptian people lose faith in the very idea of kingship when their eternal king finally proved to be mortal? Number 20 was King Djedkare Isesi poisoned by a plant. For a long time, we knew very little about King Djedkare Isesi. He was a pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, ruling during the Old Kingdom. He was important. He made significant religious changes and sent expeditions to foreign lands, but his tomb was robbed in antiquity, and we thought his mummy was lost forever. Then, in 2019, a team of Egyptian archaeologists announced they had found it. The mummy was in bad shape, just a collection of bones inside his pyramid at Saqqara, but it was him. And modern science could make those bones talk. A team led by Professor Sahar Salim, a radiologist at Cairo University famous for her work on royal mummies, examined the remains. They made a startling discovery. The king's pelvic bones showed signs of a severe infection. It was a condition called ankylosing spondylitis, a painful inflammatory arthritis that confused the spine over time. But that wasn't what killed him. The examination suggested he died from a severe gastric infection, the kind you get from contaminated food or water. He was in his 50s, a good age for the time, but he died in a very unpleasant way. This is where the mystery starts. It might have been a simple case of food poisoning, but Djedkare Isesi was a king. His food would have been prepared with the utmost care. It's not impossible, but it's less likely. Then you have to look at his reign. He was a reformer. He was one of the first kings to stop building a dedicated sun temple, a major tradition for his predecessors. This suggests a shift in religious policy, moving away from the sun god Ra, and perhaps elevating the god Osiris. Big religious changes create powerful enemies, especially among the priesthood. And there's another possibility. During his reign, Egypt was actively trading. Expeditions to the land of Punt, likely somewhere on the coast of East Africa or Arabia, brought back exotic goods. Expeditions to the Sinai brought back minerals. What if they also brought back something else? A foreign plant, a new kind of food, or a bacteria that the Egyptians had no immunity to? Or what if it wasn't an accident? Poison is the weapon of choice in a royal court. It's quiet. It mimics natural illness. If a faction in the court wanted him gone, perhaps the powerful priests of Ra who were losing influence, so a carefully administered poison that caused a stomach illness would be the perfect way to do it. The evidence of a gastric infection is there, The motive for murder is plausible, but the proof is impossible to find in bones that are over 4,000 years old. So, what really killed Djedkare Isesi? Was it a common but fatal infection that even a king couldn't fight off? Did he eat something contaminated on a military campaign? Or was he the victim of a clever assassination, a poison that left no trace but a story of a sudden violent illness? And could a plant brought from a faraway land have been the murder weapon? Number 19, was Menkaure's early death a curse in action? Menkaure built the third and smallest of the great pyramids at Giza. He stands in the shadow of his father Khafre and his grandfather Khufu. His pyramid complex was never fully finished in granite as planned. Parts were completed in cheaper mud brick. This has always suggested that he died unexpectedly, before his grand project was done. His reign was short, maybe 20 years or so, but how did he die? The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt almost 2,000 years after Menkaure lived, tells a strange story. He says an oracle from the city of Buto told Menkaure that he only had 6 years left to live. Menkaure was a good, pious king, unlike his father and grandfather, who Herodotus claims were tyrants. Menkaure was angry. He sent a message back to the oracle asking why he, a just ruler, was being punished with a short life while the tyrants lived long. The oracle replied that Egypt was destined to suffer for 150 years, and the two previous kings understood this. Menkaure, by being kind, was going against the god's plan, so his life would be cut short. Herodotus says that when Menkaure heard this, he knew his fate was sealed, so he decided to party. He had lamps lit every night and feasted day and night, turning the last 6 years of his life into 12 by never sleeping. He did this, Herodotus says, to prove the oracle wrong by living 12 years of pleasure in the 6 he was given. It's a great story, but is it true? Probably not. Herodotus was writing history, but he was also a great storyteller. His accounts are often a mix of fact and local gossip he picked up on his travels. But the story might hold a kernel of truth that Menkaure's death was sudden and unexpected. We have his sarcophagus, but it's at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. It was found in his pyramid in the 1830s by the British officer Howard Vyse. He shipped it to England, but the boat, the Beatrice, sank in a storm off the coast of Spain in 1838. Some human remains also found in the pyramid, thought to be Menkaure's, did make it to London. But radiocarbon dating in the 20th century showed they were from the Christian era, only about 2,000 years old. They belonged to someone who took shelter in the pyramid long after the pharaoh was gone. So we don't have Menkaure's body. Without a body, we can only speculate. Did he die in an accident? A construction accident at his own pyramid site? Was he killed in battle? There's no record of any major wars. Was it a sudden illness like a plague or a fast-acting infection? The fact that his pyramid complex was hastily finished by his successor Shepseskaf is our strongest clue. Something happened that no one was planning for? Did Menkaure really receive a prophecy of his own death? If he died young and unexpectedly, did later generations invent the story of the oracle to explain the tragedy? And what really lies in the wreck of the Beatrice at the bottom of the sea? Is the key to this mystery locked inside a stone box we can no longer reach? Number 18. What happened to the body of Khufu, the Great Pyramid's master? Khufu built the single largest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. The Great Pyramid of Giza is his monument, his legacy, his stairway to the stars. It is a masterpiece of engineering, a wonder of the ancient world. It was built to protect his body for eternity. And yet, we have no idea what happened to him. We have never found the mummy of King Khufu. When explorers and archaeologists first forced their way into the Great Pyramid in the modern era, they found it strangely empty. The king's chamber, deep inside the pyramid, contained a large granite sarcophagus, but it was empty. The lid was broken and pushed aside. There were no signs of burial goods, no fragments of a mummy, nothing. The immediate assumption is tomb robbers. The pyramids were prime targets for thieves from the moment they were sealed. They were giants still here, signs on the desert horizon. Robbers likely broke in during the periods of chaos, like the first intermediate period that followed the Old Kingdom. They would have taken anything of value and likely destroyed the king's body in the process, looking for jewels wrapped in the linen. This is the most common and logical explanation. But the Great Pyramid is a strange place. It has a complex internal structure with multiple chambers and passages. The king's chamber, the queen's chamber, the subterranean chamber. Some people have suggested that this complexity was part of an elaborate security system. Maybe the empty sarcophagus was a decoy. Maybe Khufu's real burial chamber is still hidden, undiscovered, somewhere inside the massive structure. In recent years, modern science has been used to probe the pyramid. The Scan Pyramids project, using techniques like muon tomography, which uses cosmic rays to detect voids, announced in 2017 that they had detected a large, previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery. They call it the Scan Pyramids Big Void. It's at least 30 meters long. What is it? Is it just a structural feature designed to relieve weight on the passages below? Or is it a hidden corridor leading to the real tomb? So far, no one has been able to access it. And there is another theory, a more controversial one. Some Egyptologists like Zahi Hawass have pointed out that no Old Kingdom pharaoh's original intact burial has ever been found inside a pyramid. They've all been robbed. It's possible that late in the New Kingdom, during the organized restoration and protection efforts by the priest, Khufu's body might have been moved from his pyramid to a secret cache, like the royal caches at Deir el-Bahri, where many other pharaohs were found. If so, he might be lying in a museum basement right now, mislabeled or unidentified. We only have one tiny statue of Khufu, a few inches high. For a man who built the biggest thing on the planet, he is remarkably absent from the historical and archaeological record. Was Khufu's mummy simply destroyed by ancient tomb robbers? Is he still waiting in a secret chamber inside his own pyramid, hidden behind a wall of stone? Or was his body moved by priests thousands of years ago, and is it now lost to history, a nameless mummy among others? The man who built the greatest tomb in the world is a king without a grave. Number 17 was Seti I, a victim of his own heart. Seti I was the father of Ramesses the Great. He was a powerful pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, a warrior king who restored Egyptian power and prestige after the chaotic Amarna period. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV17, is one of the most beautiful and well-preserved. It is a work of art, and his mummy, found in the Deir el-Bahri royal cache in 1881, is one of the best preserved royal mummies ever discovered. He looks almost peaceful, like he just fell asleep. But how did this great king die? His mummy is a puzzle. He died relatively young, probably in his early 40s. For a pharaoh, that's not very old. When his body was examined, Egyptologists noticed something strange. His heart was not in its usual place inside his chest cavity. Instead, it was found on the right side of his body. During mummification, the heart, believed to be the seat of intelligence and conscience, was almost always left in place. It was essential for the journey to the afterlife, where it would be weighed against the feather of truth. Moving, it was a major departure from standard practice. Why was it moved? The priests who prepared his body were experts. This wasn't a mistake. Some have suggested it was a magical or ritualistic act for reasons we no longer understand. But there's a more medical theory. The great anatomist Grafton Elliott Smith, who first examined the mummy in the early 20th century, believed Seti I suffered from a heart condition. Perhaps he died of a massive heart attack. The embalmers, upon opening his chest, might have found a diseased or damaged heart. In an attempt to magically heal it for the afterlife, they might have treated it separately and placed it back in what they considered a more spiritually sound position. There are no obvious signs of violence on his body, but there is a curious detail. His head was detached from his body. This was almost certainly done by tomb robbers after his death. They were looking for a valuable necklace. The priests who later found his plundered tomb and moved him to the royal cache carefully reattached his head with linen bandages. But before they did that, they must have seen his body, his chest cavity. Their decision to move his heart must have been deliberate. Seti I's reign was active. He led military campaigns in Syria and Libya. He was a builder. He was a vigorous, active king. A sudden death from a heart condition seems plausible. It would explain his death in his 40s, and it would explain the strange treatment of his heart by the embalmers. But it's a theory based on a single piece of anatomical evidence. Did the most important organ in Seti's body hold the secret to his death? Was it a medical anomaly that the priests tried to fix with magic, Or is there a completely different reason, a religious belief we've lost that explains why his heart was moved? And could a king who seemed so powerful on the outside have been hiding a fatal weakness within? Number 16, did Horemheb murder his way to the throne? Horemheb was the last king of the 18th dynasty, but he wasn't born a prince. He was a common or brilliant general who rose through the ranks under Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. He was the power behind the throne. When Tutankhamun died young, the aged vizier I took the throne for a few short years. When A died, Horemheb, commander-in-chief of the army, finally became pharaoh. He brought stability back to Egypt after the chaos of the Amarna period. He was a restorer, a lawgiver. But did he get to the top by waiting his turn, or by clearing the path? The deaths surrounding Horemheb are all suspicious. First, there's Tutankhamun. He died suddenly at age 19. Horemheb was his top general and designated heir. But somehow I, a much older man, became king. How did that happen? One theory, promoted by Egyptologist Bob Breer, is that I, with Horemheb's backing, had Tutankhamun murdered. Then there's I. He ruled for only about 4 years. He was already an old man, so a natural death is perfectly possible. But it's very convenient for Horemheb. Once A was gone, Horemheb took the throne. And one of the first things he did was a systematic campaign to erase his predecessors. He destroyed monuments belonging to Akhenaten, Neferuaten, Menkaure, Tutankhamun, and I. He chiseled their names out of history and often put his own name in their place. He wanted it to look like he was the direct successor of Amenhotep III, wiping the entire Amarna heresy from the record. This is more than just political maneuvering, it's a historical purge. People who erase history often have something to hide. Horemheb's tomb as a private citizen at Saqqara, built before he became king, has some interesting carvings. One scene shows foreign captives. It's a standard scene. But the 10th rays and analysis have shown that the original scene underneath was a royal procession, possibly showing Tutankhamun and I. He literally covered them up. We don't know how Horemheb himself died. He ruled for about 28 years and died without an heir, passing the throne to his vizier, who became Ramesses I, the founder of the 19th dynasty. We have his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 57, but it was unfinished and robbed. His sarcophagus was found broken open. His mummy has never been identified. The mystery of Horemheb is not how he died, but how he lived. Was he a patient servant who finally got his due? Or was he a ruthless puppet master who eliminated 2 kings of Boy and an old man to seize power? The evidence is circumstantial. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. His subsequent actions, the historical erasure, look like the work of a man covering his tracks. He was a great ruler for Egypt, but great rulers are often the most ruthless. Was Horemheb the ultimate survivor of a dangerous political game? Or was he the one who made the game so dangerous? Did he order the death of Tutankhamun? Did he arrange a quiet retirement for the elderly AI? And does the absence of his mummy mean his enemies gave him the same treatment he gave his predecessors, total oblivion? Number 15. Was Menkaure a king, a queen, or a political ghost? The end of the Amarna period is one of the most confusing times in Egyptian history. Akhenaten, the heretic king, dies. And then things get murky. A mysterious ruler, or rulers, appear for a very short time before Tutankhamun takes the throne. One of these figures is named Menkaure, and we know almost nothing about him. Or her. Who was Menkaure? The name appears on a few inscriptions. He seems to have been a co-regent with Akhenaten in the last years of his reign. He was given the title Beloved of Akhenaten. The traditional theory is that Menkaure was Akhenaten's younger brother or son, who was groomed to be the next king but died young, after ruling for only a year or 2. But there are other theories. Some Egyptologists like Nicholas Reeves have suggested that Menkaure was actually Nefertiti, Akhenaten's famous wife, who took on a new name and ruled as a male pharaoh after her husband's death, much like Hatshepsut had done centuries before. There is a co-regent named Neferuaten, and this name is very similar to Nefertiti's full name. Are Menkaure and Neferuaten the same person? Is that person Nefertiti? It's a historical knot. The mystery gets deeper when we look at the bodies. The famous tomb KV-55 in the Valley of the Kings was a strange discovery. It contained a jumble of funeral equipment from several Amarna period royals, including Queen Tiye Akhenaten's mother and Akhenaten himself. It also contained a single gold gilded coffin with a mummy inside. The name on the coffin had been chiseled out. For years, this mummy was believed to be Akhenaten, but DNA tests published in a 2010 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA threw a wrench in the works. The DNA showed the KV-55 mummy was the son of Amenhotep III and Queen Ta, and the father of Tutankhamun. This fits Akhenaten perfectly, but the skeletal analysis showed the man died in his early 20s. Akhenaten ruled for 17 years and had grown daughters, so he must have been older when he died, probably in his 30s or 40s. This age fits Menkaure perfectly if he was Akhenaten's brother. So is the KV-55 mummy Akhenaten or Menkaure. The evidence is contradictory. If it's Menkaure, then where is Akhenaten? If it's Akhenaten, how do we explain the young age at death? The mummy in KV-55 also had a blow to the head, but most experts believe this happened after death, probably when the tomb was desecrated. We don't have a clear cause of death. Menkaure ruled for a moment and then vanished. There is no known tomb. The only potential body is a source of intense debate. This was a time of huge political and religious tension. The old priesthood of Amun-Ra was waiting to retake power. A young, inexperienced king like Menkaure would have been incredibly vulnerable. His death, whether by illness or assassination, paved the way for the even younger Tutankhamun to take the throne. A boy who could be easily manipulated by the old guard like Ai and Horemheb. Was Menkaure a young man killed by a resurgent priesthood? Was he Nefertiti in disguise, overthrown by those who wouldn't accept a female king? Or did he just die of a disease, an unlucky footnote in a chaotic time? The ghost of Menkaure haunts the end of the Amarna age, a king who might not have been a king at all. Number 14, did a hippo get the last bite of King Menes? King Menes is a legendary figure. He is credited with one of the most important events in history, the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BC. He founded the first dynasty and is considered the very first pharaoh of a united kingdom. He is the George Washington of ancient Egypt. But how did this foundational figure die? The main source for his death is the ancient historian Manetho, who wrote his History of Egypt in the 3rd century BC. Manetho claims that after a reign of over 60 years, Menes was killed by a hippopotamus. At first, this sounds absurd. It sounds like a myth, a story made up to give a legendary king a legendary death. But we should think about it more carefully. The hippopotamus was one of the most dangerous animals in ancient Egypt. They are not the gentle giants we see in cartoons. Hippos are notoriously aggressive, territorial, and unpredictable. They are responsible for more human deaths in Africa today than any other large animal. For an ancient Egyptian, a hippo was a symbol of chaos and immense power. The god set was sometimes associated with the hippo. Royal hippo hunts were a major part of pharaonic ideology. It was a way for the king to show his power over the forces of chaos and nature. We have images from later periods of kings like Amenhotep III hunting hippos from a small papyrus skiff. It was a dangerous sport. A hippo could easily overturn a boat and kill its occupants with its massive jaws and tusk-like teeth. So, is it possible that Menes, the great unifier, was killed during a royal hunt? Absolutely, it's a plausible, if dramatic, and it would have been a shocking event. The king, the master of order, consumed by a beast of chaos. It's the kind of event that would be remembered and passed down for thousands of years, eventually making its way into Manetho's history. The problem is, we have no contemporary evidence. Writing was in its infancy during Menes' time. The records are scarce. We also have a problem with his identity. Some scholars believe Mens was a legendary name, and that the historical king who unified Egypt was a ruler named Narmer, or Aha. The famous Narmer palette shows a king conquering his enemies, a clear depiction of unification. Is Narmer the same person as Menes? We don't know for sure, and we have never found his tomb or his body. A large tomb at Saqqara belonging to a high official was once thought to be his, but that's been disproven. There's a large tomb at Abydos for King Aha that is a possibility. But without a body, we can't look for hippo-inflicted injuries. We are left with only the ancient story. Was the story of the hippo a literal truth, a shocking end for the first king? Or was it an allegory, a way of saying that even the greatest king can be swallowed by the forces of chaos if he is not careful? Did Manetho record a real historical event, or just a very old piece of political folklore? The first chapter of Egypt's long history ends with a question mark shaped like a giant, angry hippo. It's number 13. Was Ptolemy the 13th's drowning an accident of war or a quiet execution? Ptolemy the 13th was the younger brother of the famous Cleopatra VII. He was also her husband and her co-ruler. It was a messy family situation, typical of the Ptolemaic dynasty. They were locked in a bitter civil war for control of Egypt, and they made the mistake of getting involved with an even bigger power, Rome, in the form of Julius Caesar, through Ptolemy. The 13th was only a boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old, and he was largely controlled by his ambitious courtiers Pothinus and Achillas. When the defeated Roman general Pompey fled to Egypt, they made a fatal miscalculation. They had Pompey assassinated, hoping to curry favor with Caesar. Caesar was horrified. He came to Alexandria and, seeing the chaos, decided to settle the Egyptian civil war himself. He sided with Cleopatra, who had famously smuggled herself into the palace, wrapped in a rug to meet him. This led to open war in the streets of Alexandria between Caesar's legions and Ptolemy XIII's army. The Great Library of Alexandria was accidentally set on fire during the fighting. The conflict climaxed at the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. Caesar, reinforced by fresh troops, crushed the Egyptian army. Ptolemy XIII tried to flee the battlefield by boat across the river. The boat was overloaded with other fugitives and it capsized. The young king, weighed down by his golden armor, drowned in the Nile. That's the official story, as told by Roman sources like Caesar himself in his commentaries. It's a neat, tidy end to a conflict. The enemy king dies in the chaos of battle, a victim of his own panicked retreat. It absolves Caesar of any direct responsibility. But was it really that simple? Caesar was a master of propaganda. He wrote the history, and he wrote it to make himself look good. But Ptolemy XIII was a major problem for him. As long as the boy king lived, he was a rallying point for Egyptian resistance against Caesar and his chosen ruler, Cleopatra. His death was extremely convenient. Could his drowning have been too assisted? It would have been very easy in the chaos of a battle for a Roman soldier or one of Cleopatra's agents to make sure the king's boat overturned, or to make sure he didn't make it to shore. An accidental drowning is the perfect political murder. It leaves no wounds, no witnesses who will talk, and a plausible story for the history books. Cleopatra was known for her ruthlessness when it came to securing her throne. She had another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, killed a few years later. Eliminating her rival brother husband was completely in character. We will never know for sure. Ptolemy XIII's body, clad in its golden armor, was supposedly recovered from the Nile mud later. But its final resting place is unknown. We are left with the victor's version of history. A boy king, a pawn in a game played by giants like Caesar and Cleopatra, ends up at the bottom of a river. Did he die because of a simple tragic accident in the fog of war? Or was his death a cold, calculated move by Caesar or Cleopatra to remove a political obstacle? Was the weight of his golden armor the only thing that pulled him down, or was it the weight of Roman ambition? Number 12 was the heretic king Akhenaten, a victim of plague, poison, or piety. Akhenaten is perhaps the most controversial pharaoh in all of Egyptian history. He was born Amenhotep IV, but he changed his name to Akhenaten. He abandoned Egypt's pantheon of gods, especially the powerful state god Amun-Ra. He declared that there was only one god, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. He closed the old temples, moved the capital city to a new site in the desert called Amarna, and revolutionized Egyptian art and religion. He was either a visionary mystic or a dangerous heretic, depending on who you ask. And his death is a complete mystery. His 17-year reign was tumultuous. The changes he forced on Egypt were not popular, especially with the thousands of priests of the old gods who were now out of a job. The military was also likely unhappy, as Akhenaten's foreign policy seemed to be one of disinterest, allowing Egypt's empire in the Near East to crumble. He was a king with many powerful enemies. Then, around year 17 of his reign, he disappears from the record. We don't know how he died. We don't know where he was originally buried. His new city of Amarna was abandoned shortly after his death. His son, Tutankhamun, reversed all his religious reforms and moved the court back to Thebes. The names of Akhenaten and his god were hacked from monuments. The establishment tried to erase him from history. What happened to him? One theory is assassination. The priests of Amun-Ra had every reason to want him gone. The military, led by men like Horemheb, might have seen him as a weak and incompetent ruler who was destroying the country. A palace coup is a very real possibility. Poison would be the likely weapon. Another theory is plague. We have letters from foreign rulers, the Amarna letters, that speak of a plague sweeping through the region at this time. An epidemic could easily have reached the crowded new city of Amarna and killed the king. This would be a natural, if ironic, death for a king who believed his god was the giver of all life. And then there is the question of his body. As mentioned earlier, the mummy in tomb KV55 is a major point of contention. Is it Akhenaten or Menkaure? If it is Akhenaten, the skeletal evidence suggests he died young and was not in good health. The DNA evidence from the 2010 JAMA study showed that the Amarna royal family was highly inbred. Akhenaten married his sister to produce Tutankhamun. This level of incest can lead to a host of genetic disorders and a weakened immune system. Perhaps Akhenaten simply died from a combination of congenital health problems. His unique portrayal in art, with a long skull, wide hips, and a pot belly, has led to all sorts of medical theories, from Marfan syndrome to epilepsy. Most of these have been disproven by the skeletal and DNA evidence, which shows no signs of these specific conditions. But it does point to a family that was not genetically robust. Was Akhenaten murdered by the priests and generals who hated his reforms? Did a simple plague germ bring down the man who defied 1,000 gods? Or was his death the inevitable result of generations of incest, a royal family that was literally collapsing from within? His end was as mysterious as his reign, and his enemies made sure it stayed that way. It's number 11, who killed the screaming mummy. In 1881, the Deir el-Bahri royal cache was discovered. It was a tomb where New Kingdom priests had hidden the mummies of many great pharaohs to protect them from robbers. Alongside kings like Seti I and Ramesses the Great, they found a plain, undecorated coffin. Inside was one of the most disturbing mummies ever found. It was a young man, his face locked in an eternal scream. His hands and feet were bound. He had been mummified, but in a strange way. He was not carefully wrapped in fine linen, but in a sheepskin or goatskin and ritually impure material for ancient Egyptians. He also wasn't fully eviscerated. He was just sort of dried out. This was a man who had been denied a proper burial. This was a curse. He is known as Unknown Man E, or more simply, the Screaming Mummy. For over a century, his identity was a mystery. Who was he? Why was he buried in such a dishonorable way, yet still placed in a royal cache? The theories ranged from a disgraced Hittite prince to a member of the royal family who committed a terrible crime. The answer seems to have come from the investigation into the death of another pharaoh, Ramesses III. We know from a document called the Judicial Papyrus of Turin that there was a plot to assassinate Ramesses III. The plot, known as the Harem Conspiracy, was led by one of his secondary wives, Queen Tiye, who wanted to put her own son, a prince named Menkaure, on the throne. The papyrus tells us the plotters were caught and put on trial. Many were sentenced to death. For Prince Menkaure, the text is cryptic. It says the judges left him in his place, he took his own life. In 2012, a team of scientists led by Zahi Hawass and Karsten Pusch used DNA analysis to solve both mysteries at once. They took DNA samples from the Screaming Mummy and from the mummy of Ramesses III. The results were a perfect match. The Screaming Mummy was the son of Ramesses III. He was almost certainly Prince Menkaure. The evidence on his body tells a grim story. There are marks on his neck consistent with strangulation or hanging. He died a violent death. So did he really commit suicide, as the papyrus hints? He took his own life could be a euphemism. Perhaps he was given the choice to commit suicide to avoid a more shameful public execution. Or perhaps he was simply executed by strangulation, and the official record was softened. The mystery is no longer who he was, but the exact circumstances of his death. The look of agony on his face is real. It's not from the mummification process. It's because his jaw was not bound shut, as was the custom. It was a final insult. He died in disgrace, was denied a proper burial, and was condemned to scream for eternity. What were his last moments like? Was he forced to kill himself, or was he murdered by the executioner? Did his father, Ramesses III, die before the plotters were caught, or did he survive long enough to pass judgment on his own son? And why did the priests who reburied the royal mummies decide to save this cursed prince? placing him alongside the very kings he had betrayed. Number 10 was Unas, a cannibal, and did his beliefs lead to his death? Unas was the last king of the 5th dynasty. His pyramid at Saqqara looks unremarkable from the outside. It's small and badly ruined, but inside it contains a revolution. The walls of his burial chamber are covered in writing. This is the first appearance of what we now call the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in the world. They are a collection of spells and utterances designed to help the king navigate the afterlife and become one with the gods. Most of the texts are about rebirth, magic, and cosmic journeys, but one set of spells is deeply shocking. It is known as the Cannibal Hymn. The hymn describes King Unas in the afterlife as a savage hunter who tracks down, slaughters, and eats the gods themselves. Unas is the bull of heaven, who lives on the being of every god, who eats their entrails. Unas eats their magic. Their spirits are in his belly. By devouring the gods, he absorbs their power and becomes the greatest of them all. This is powerful, terrifying imagery, but was it just symbolic poetry, or did it reflect a real belief, or even a real practice? The idea of ritual cannibalism in ancient Egypt is highly controversial. Most Egyptologists believe the cannibal hymn is purely metaphorical. It's a brutal way of describing the king's assimilation of divine power, but what if it wasn't? What if there was a faction in the 5th dynasty priesthood that practiced or believed in a more literal interpretation of these texts? Unas was a king who made a radical break with tradition by carving these texts into his tomb. This was a new and powerful form of magic. Where did it come from? Did it come from a fringe religious cult that Unas decided to elevate? We don't know how Unas died. His mummy has never been found, only a few fragments of a skull and an arm in his pyramid, which may or may not be his. His reign seems to have ended a period of stability. The next king, Teti, started a new dynasty, the 6th. A change in dynasty can sometimes signal a period of trouble or a break in the bloodline. Could Unas's radical religious beliefs have made him enemies? If the mainstream priesthood saw his cannibal hymn as blasphemous and dangerous, they might have moved against him. Or, if he was part of a cult that practiced dark rituals, perhaps a rival faction decided he had gone too far. His death could have been a direct result of the very texts he used to guarantee his eternal life. It's a chilling thought. A king so obsessed with ultimate power that he commissions a text about devouring the gods. Did this obsession lead to his downfall in the mortal world? Was the cannibal hymn just a poem, or was it a political manifesto that signed its author's death warrant? And are the missing pieces of his body just lost to time, or were they scattered by enemies who wanted to make sure the God-Eater could never rise again? And number 9. What really happened in Hatshepsut's final days? That Hatshepsut was one of the most powerful women in history. She was supposed to be the regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III. But she wasn't content to rule from the shadows. She declared herself pharaoh, had herself depicted as a male king with a false beard, and ruled Egypt for over 20 years during a time of great peace and prosperity. She was a prolific builder, and her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the jewels of ancient Egypt. And then, about 20 years after her death, someone tried to erase her from history. The statues of her were smashed, her image was chiseled off temple walls, her name was removed from the official king lists. This was a deliberate, systematic attempt to pretend she never existed. For centuries, the prime suspect was her stepson, Thutmose III. The story was that he had been forced to wait in the wings for decades while she ruled. When she died and he finally became sole pharaoh, he took his bitter revenge, wiping out the memory of the woman who usurped his throne. But this theory has problems. The erasure didn't happen right after her death. It happened about 20 years into his own very successful reign. Why wait so long? A more recent theory, proposed by Egyptologists like Peter Dorman, is that the erasure was not about personal revenge. It was about political necessity. Thutmose III wanted to ensure a smooth succession for his own son. The idea of a woman ruling as king was a radical break with tradition, a violation of Mat, the divine order. To make sure no other ambitious royal woman got the same idea, he had to remove the precedent. He had to make Hatshepsut's reign officially unhappen. So, how did she die? For a long time, we didn't know. Her mummy was not in her own tomb. But in 2007, Zahi Hawass announced that a mummy found in a minor tomb, KV60, was Hatshepsut. The identification was made through a broken tooth. A box with Hatshepsut's name on it contained the tooth, and it perfectly matched a gap in the mummy's jaw. It was a brilliant piece of archaeological detective work. CT scans of the mummy revealed she was an obese woman in her 50s. She had diabetes, and she died from bone cancer that had spread throughout her body. It seems she died of natural causes, but the scans also revealed something else. She had a severe skin condition, possibly psoriasis. To treat it, she may have used a carcinogenic skin lotion. In 2011, researchers at the University of Bonn in Germany analyzed residue from a flask inscribed with her name and found it contained a lotion with benzopyrene, a known carcinogen. Did she accidentally poison herself over many years while trying to treat a skin problem? So, the mystery shifts. It's not who killed Hatshepsut, but did her successor, Thutmose III, know she was dying? If she was visibly ill with cancer, her court would have known the end was near. This might have given Thutmose III and his supporters time to plan their takeover and the subsequent restoration of a traditional male-only kingship. Her death might have been natural, but the political fallout was huge. Did Hatshepsut's attempt to treat a cosmetic problem lead to the cancer that killed her? Did Thutmose III patiently wait for her to die, or did he deny her access to the best care to speed things along? And was the decision to erase her a cold political calculation, or was there still a hint of personal resentment from the man who had to wait half his life to become king? Number 8. Was Alexander the Great a victim of sickness, alcohol, or assassination? Alexander the Great conquered the known world, from Greece to India. In 332 BC, he conquered Egypt, was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule, and was declared a pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria, which would become the intellectual capital of the ancient world. But his time as pharaoh was short. In 323 BC, at the age of just 32, he died in Babylon. His death changed the course of history, and we still don't know exactly what killed him. The ancient sources, like Arrian and Plutarch, give a detailed account of his final days. After a long bout of heavy drinking at a party, he developed a fever. Over the next 2 weeks, he got progressively weaker. He lost the ability to speak. He could only move his eyes to acknowledge his grieving generals as they filed past his bed. Finally, he died. What was the cause? The most common theories are natural diseases. Malaria is a strong possibility. Babylon was a marshy area, and he had just been through the malarial regions of India. Typhoid fever, caused by contaminated food or water, is another prime suspect. The symptoms described fever, abdominal pain, progressive paralysis matched typhoid well. Another theory points to his lifestyle. Alexander was a legendary drinker. Some scholars suggest he died of acute pancreatitis brought on by a massive alcohol binge. Or perhaps years of heavy drinking had destroyed his liver, leaving him vulnerable to any infection. But then there is the possibility of murder. Alexander had a lot of enemies. He had executed some of his own loyal generals. His Macedonian troops were restless and wanted to go home. Upon his death, his empire immediately shattered as his generals, the Diadochi, began fighting each other for control. Many people had a motive to kill him. The theory is that he was poisoned. The ancient accounts mention that his illness began after a specific drinking party. Poison could have been slipped into his wine. The suspects are numerous. Antipater, the regent Alexander had left in charge of Greece, was falling out of favor. The ancient sources claim Antipater's son, Cassander, might have brought a poison to Babylon. Another suspect is Aristotle, Alexander's old tutor, who had a relative executed by Alexander. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but in the high-stakes world of Alexander's court, it was a real possibility. A 2014 study by Dr. Leo Shep from the New Zealand National Poison Center suggested that if he was poisoned, the weapon might have been Veratrum album, a white hellebore plant. It could produce the symptoms described, including the slow onset of illness, without being immediately fatal. It would mimic a natural disease. We can't be sure because we don't have his body. After his death, his corpse became a powerful political symbol. It was hijacked by Ptolemy I, one of his generals, who took it to Egypt. It was housed in a magnificent tomb in Alexandria and was a major tourist attraction for centuries. Roman emperors like Caesar and Augustus visited it, but at some point in late antiquity, during a period of riots and upheaval in Alexandria, the tomb and the body disappeared. They have never been found. Did a mosquito in a Babylonian marsh kill the world's greatest conqueror? Was it a simple bacteria in his food? Or was his death the final political act of his reign, an assassination by the very men who would inherit his empire? The greatest cold case of the ancient world remains unsolved. Number 7. Who was Neferneferuit and the Phantom Queen? The story of Menkaure was confusing. The story of Neferneferuaten is even more so. This name, Neferneferuaten, appears in the historical record in the last years of Akhenaten's reign, and for a very short time after his death. It's a royal name written in a cartouche. This person was a pharaoh, but who was she? The name itself, Neferneferuaten, means beautiful are the beauties of Aten. This is very similar to the full name of Queen Nefertiti, Neferneria Nefertiti. This is the strongest piece of evidence that Neferneferuaten was, in fact, Nefertiti herself ruling as king. Some artifacts even give the name as Enkathapir Neferneferuaten, and an inscription specifies that this is the female ruler effective for her husband. This seems to point directly to Nefertiti. The theory goes like this. In the final years of Akhenaten's reign, he may have elevated Nefertiti to the status of co-regent, a king ruling alongside him. When he died, she continued to rule as sole pharaoh for a few years before Tutankhamun came to the throne. This would explain the short mysterious reigns between Akhenaten and Tut. It was one person, Nefertiti, ruling under a new name. But why would she do this? Perhaps to maintain the Atenist religion she and her husband had created. Or perhaps to secure the throne for her young stepson, son Tutankhamun. By holding power herself, she could manage the transition. The mystery is, what happened to her? If Nefertiti ruled as the pharaoh Neferneferuaten, where is her tomb? Where is her body? There is no record of her death. She simply vanishes. Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves has a bold theory. He believes that the famous tomb of Tutankhamun was originally Nefertiti's tomb. He argues that Tutankhamun's death was sudden and unexpected, so they had to reuse an existing tomb. He points to lines on the painted walls of Tut's burial chamber that he believes indicate sealed-off doorways. Behind these walls, he thinks, is the undiscovered burial of Queen Nefertiti. In 2015, this theory caused a huge stir. Radar scans were conducted in Tutankhamun's tomb. The initial results were tantalizing, suggesting there might be hidden voids behind the walls. But subsequent, more thorough scans by different teams have been inconclusive or have found no evidence of hidden chambers. The jury is still out. If Nefertiti did rule as king, her death would have been a moment of huge political importance. The Old Guard, the priests of Amun, would have seen her as the last vestige of the hated Amarna heresy. Did she die of natural causes, and was her burial deliberately hidden to protect it from being desecrated? Or was she overthrown and murdered by the faction that wanted to return to the old ways? Her disappearance from the record is total. It's as if once her usefulness was over, the curtain was drawn, and her final act was never recorded. Was Neferneferuaten just a name for a male king we know little about, like Menkaure? Or was she the great Queen Nefertiti making a last stand for her family and her god? And is the world's most famous beautiful woman, whose bust is an icon of ancient Egypt, lying in a hidden chamber just feet away from the treasures of Tutankhamun? Number 6. Did I steal a kingdom from a murdered queen? The story of Tutankhamun's death is a mystery, but the story of what happened immediately after is just as strange and involves a potential murder mystery of its own. When the boy king died without an heir, Egypt was left in a precarious position. The 18th dynasty was on the verge of extinction. We know what happened next because of a set of clay tablets found in the archives of the Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey. The Hittite records tell a shocking story. They say that the Queen of Egypt, a woman whose husband had just died, wrote a desperate letter to the Hittite king, Suppiluliuma I. She calls herself Dakamunzu, which is likely a Hittite translation of the Egyptian title Tehemet-Nesu, or the king's wife. The letter says, "My husband has died. A son I have not. But to you, they say, you have many sons. If you would give me one son of yours, he would become my husband. I would not want to take one of my servants. I am afraid to make him my husband." This was an unprecedented request, an Egyptian queen asking for a foreign prince to marry her and become pharaoh. The Hittite king was suspicious. He thought it was a trap. He sent an envoy to Egypt to check out the story. The envoy returned and confirmed it was true. So the king sent one of his sons, a prince named Zanenza, to Egypt to marry the queen and take the throne. But Prince Zanenza never arrived. The Hittite records state that he was murdered on the journey somewhere on the border of Egypt. The Hittite king was furious and accused the Egyptians of treachery. The marriage alliance, which could have changed the history of the ancient world, was shattered. Who was this queen? The timing strongly suggests she was Ankhesenamun, the young widow of Tutankhamun. And who were her servants that she was afraid to marry? The two most powerful men in Egypt were the general Horemheb and the old vizier Ai. She was likely referring to one or both of them. And who killed the Hittite prince? The obvious suspects are the same two men. They would not want a foreigner, a Hittite, to become pharaoh. They had their own ambitions. Shortly after this incident, the elderly Ai became the next pharaoh. And he married Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun. The very thing she seemed to fear came true. After she appears as Ai's wife on a few monuments, Ankhesenamun completely disappears from the historical record. We don't know when she died, how she died, or where she was buried. Like, this sequence of events is incredibly suspicious. A young queen makes a desperate move to stay in power. Her chosen foreign husband is murdered. And the man who likely ordered the murder forces her to marry him, and then she vanishes. It smells like a classic power grab, full of intrigue and bloodshed. Ai, the old courtier who had served the royal family for decades, showed his true colors at the end. Did A order the assassination of Prince Ananza to clear his own path to the throne? What happened to Ankhesenamun? Did she die of a broken heart, or did I, having used her to legitimize his reign, quietly dispose of her? Her tragic story is a footnote to Tutankhamun's, but her death is one of the darkest and most unsolved political mysteries of the 18th dynasty. Number 5. Was Seqenenre-Tao's death and execution or a battlefield tragedy? Seqenenre-Tao was a king of the 17th dynasty, ruling from Thebes in the south of Egypt. During his time, Egypt was a divided country. The north was controlled by foreign rulers known as the Hyksos, who had invaded and settled in the Nile Delta. Seqenenre-Tao was one of the first Theban kings to launch a war of liberation to drive the Hyksos out and reunite Egypt. He started a war that his sons Kamose and Ahmose would eventually win, ushering in the glorious New Kingdom. But Seqenenre-Tao did not live to see victory. His mummy, found in the Deir el-Bahri cache, is one of the most gruesome ever discovered. His head is covered with horrific wounds. He has a massive axe wound in his forehead that likely penetrated his brain. His cheeks and nose are smashed. There is a dagger wound below his ear. His skull is shattered. This was a man who died a terribly violent death. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that he died in battle. He was leading his army against the Hyksos, was captured, and was ceremonially executed by his enemies on the battlefield. The variety of wounds suggests he was attacked by multiple assailants with different weapons, which could happen in the chaos of a fight. But recent analysis of his mummy using CT scans has challenged this theory. A 2021 study led by Sahar Salim and Zahi Hawass revealed new details. The wounds on his head were skillfully covered with embalming material, suggesting the mummification was done in a controlled, professional royal workshop, not hastily on a battlefield. More importantly, the scientists found that his hands were bound behind his back when he died. This is suggested by the position of his arms and the lack of defensive wounds on his forearms. A man fighting for his life would raise his arms to protect his head. Seqenenre-Tao did not. This changes the story completely. It suggests he was not killed in the heat of battle. He was captured, his hands were tied, and he was forced to kneel before his executioners, who then butchered him with ceremonial axes and daggers. It was a cold-blooded execution. But where did it happen? Did the Hyksos king, Apophis, capture him and execute him in his northern capital? Or, was there betrayal closer to home? Could he have been assassinated in his own palace in Thebes by a rival faction that thought, his war against the Hyksos was too risky? A palace coup is always a possibility. However, the weapons used to kill him, based on the shapes of the wounds, match Hyksos weapons found in the Delta region. This points back to the enemy. The new evidence paints a terrifying picture of the king's last moments. He was a prisoner, helpless, facing his enemies. His death, far from being a heroic battlefield sacrifice, was a brutal and humiliating execution. Must have fueled his son's desire for revenge and given them the motivation they needed to finally drive the Hyksos out of Egypt. Was he executed on the battlefield as his horrified soldiers watched, or was he taken back to the Hyksos capital of Avaris and killed in a formal ceremony? Did his own people betray him and hand him over to the enemy? The wounds on his skull tell us how he died, but the location and the traitors, if any, remain a secret. Number 4. Did Ramesses III actually survive the attack? The death of Ramesses III is one of the most famous murder plots in ancient history. The harem conspiracy, as we've discussed, was a plot by his wife Ti to kill him and place her son Menkaure on the throne. The judicial papyrus of Turin details the plotters, their use of black magic, and their trials. But it never explicitly says whether the assassination attempt was successful. It just says they overthrew their lord the king. For a long time, this was ambiguous. The mummy of Ramesses III, found in the Deir el-Barikash, showed no obvious signs of trauma. It looked like he had died of natural causes, so the historical consensus was that the plot was discovered and stopped just in time. The king survived, put the conspirators on trial, and then died later of unrelated causes. He was around 65 years old, so a natural death was plausible. This was the accepted story for over a century. But in 2012, modern science reopened the case. A team of scientists, including Zahi Hawass, Sahar Salim, and the geneticist Karsten Pusch, put the mummy of Ramesses III through a CT scanner. What they found was shocking. Hidden beneath the thick layers of linen bandages around his neck was a massive wound. His throat had been slit from side to side, a deep gash that went almost to his spine. It severed his trachea, esophagus, and all the major blood vessels. It was an instantly fatal wound. There's no way he could have survived it. The assassins had succeeded. The papyrus was just being polite. You didn't write, and they murdered the God King. You wrote, they overthrew him. The CT scans also found a small amulet, a Horus eye, had been placed inside the wound by the embalmers, a magical attempt to promote healing for the afterlife. This proves the wound was there before mummification. This discovery completely changed our understanding of one of the key events of the New Kingdom. The plot wasn't foiled, it worked. The king was murdered, but it raises a new set of questions. If the king was dead, who organized the trials of the conspirators? The papyrus details a series of trials presided over by high-ranking judges. This must have been organized by Ramesses III's legitimate heir, his chosen successor, Ramesses IV. It means that while the harem conspiracy succeeded in killing the king, it failed in its ultimate goal of seizing power. The loyalist faction quickly, took control, put the legitimate heir on the throne, and then rounded up and punished the killers. The mystery is now about the timeline. How long did it take for the plot to be uncovered? Did the assassins kill the king and then fail to act quickly enough to take control of the palace? Was there a bloody fight inside the royal residence between the two factions immediately after the murder? The papyrus is a legal document. It doesn't give us the juicy details of the coup and counter-coup. A 2016 study also revealed that one of the king's toes had been chopped off by a different weapon, possibly a sword or an axe, suggesting he was attacked by multiple assailants. So, the king is dead. But what happened in the chaotic hours and days that followed? How close did Prince Menkaure and his mother get to actually winning? And was the official story that the plot was foiled a deliberate piece of propaganda by the new king, Ramesses IV, to hide the terrible truth that the divine pharaoh had been so vulnerably and successfully assassinated? Number 3, was Cleopatra's suicide a Roman cover-up? The death of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, is one of the most famous death scenes in history. As told by the Roman historian Plutarch, after her lover Mark Antony died in her arms, and facing the humiliation of being paraded in chains in the triumphal procession of her conqueror, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, she decided to take her own life. She had a basket of figs brought to her, and hidden beneath the fruit was an asp, a venomous snake. She allowed the snake to bite her on the arm and died, looking as serene as if she were sleeping. Her 2 handmaidens died with her. It's a dramatic, romantic, and tragic story. It has been immortalized by Shakespeare and Hollywood. It has become the undisputed version of events. But is it true? A growing number of scholars and forensic experts are starting to question it. The story, they argue, has some serious problems. First, the murder weapon. An asp, likely an Egyptian cobra, is a large snake. Smuggling it into a guarded room in a basket of figs would be very difficult. Second, death by snakebite is not a reliable or peaceful way to die. The venom is a neurotoxin, but it can be slow. It often causes convulsions, vomiting, and paralysis. It is not the serene death Plutarch describes. Third, 3 people dying from one snake in a short period of time is highly unlikely. The snake might not inject enough venom, or it might not bite at all. So what are the alternatives? Poison is a much more likely candidate. Cleopatra was known to have studied poisons. She could have taken a fast-acting and relatively painless poison cocktail. This would have been a much more dignified and certain way to die. But the most provocative theory is that she didn't commit suicide at all. She was murdered. The only source we have for the suicide story is Octavian. He is the one who controlled the narrative. Everyone who was in that room died. So the official story is the victor's story, and it was a brilliant piece of propaganda. It portrayed Cleopatra as a hysterical, dramatic, exotic woman who took the coward's way out. It portrayed Octavian as a merciful conqueror who would have spared her life if she hadn't killed herself. But Octavian had a powerful motive to kill her. Cleopatra was intelligent, charismatic, and she had a son with Julius Caesar, Caesarion. Caesarion was a direct threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's sole heir. By eliminating both Cleopatra and her son, which he did, he removed his last great political rival. A quiet assassination disguised as an exotic suicide was the perfect solution. It made him look good and solved his political problems. The ultimate key to this mystery is Cleopatra's tomb. Well, Plutarch says she was buried with Mark Antony in a magnificent tomb she had built for them. But we have never found it. Archaeologists have been searching for it for decades, especially around the ancient city of Alexandria. Finding her body would allow us to test for poison, or at least examine her for evidence of her cause of death. But for now, it remains lost. Was Cleopatra the author of her own dramatic death? Or was she the last victim of the man who would become the first emperor of Rome? Her death, a carefully constructed lie to launch a new empire. The story of the ISP is iconic, but the truth might be much darker and more clinical. Number 2. What was the real killer in Tutankhamun's body? No pharaoh's death is more mysterious than Tutankhamun's. He was the boy king who died around the age of 19. His tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, was a global sensation, and ever since we have been asking what killed him. For decades, the leading theory was murder. The first X-rays of his mummy in 1968 revealed bone fragments inside his skull. This led to the popular theory, championed by Egyptologist Bob Breer in his book The Murder of Tutankhamun, that the king was killed by a blow to the back of the head. The prime suspects were his ambitious successors, Eye and Horemheb. It was a compelling story of palace intrigue. The more advanced CT scans in 2005 debunked this theory. The hole in the back of his head was made by the embalmers to insert resin. The bone fragments were likely dislodged during the mummification process, or even by Carter's team when they removed the golden mask. There was no evidence of a blow to the head. The 2005 scan did reveal something else, though: a badly broken left leg, a fracture just above the knee. The break was severe, a compound fracture that would have torn through the skin. It showed no signs of healing, meaning it happened just days before his death. This led to a new theory, the chariot accident. The idea was that Tutankhamun, who loved to hunt, fell from his chariot, shattered his leg, and the open wound became infected, leading to gangrene or blood poisoning that killed him. It was a plausible tragic accident, but the story got more complicated in 2010. A major DNA study published in JAMA analyzed the mummies of Tutankhamun and his family. The results were stunning. They confirmed his parents were Akhenaten and his sister, whose mummy is known as the Younger Lady from KV35. This meant Tutankhamun was the product of intense incest, and it showed in his body. The DNA test revealed he had multiple genetic disorders, including a clubfoot and Kohler's disease, a rare bone necrosis in his foot that would have made it painful for him to walk. In fact, his tomb contained over 130 walking sticks. A dashing young king riding a chariot seemed less likely now. He was a physically frail young man who walked with a limp. The DNA study also found something else. They found the DNA of the parasite that causes malaria, and specifically the most virulent strain, Plasmodium falciparum. When Tutankhamun had chronic, severe malaria, this created a new, more complex picture of his death. We now have a young man who is genetically weakened by inbreeding. He has crippling bone diseases that cause him constant pain. He is suffering from a severe form of malaria, and then he suffers a terrible broken leg. It's a perfect storm. Any one of these things might not have been fatal on its own. But together, a simple fall could have been a death sentence. His weakened, malaria-ridden immune system would have had no chance of fighting off a major infection from the broken leg. So what was the single cause of death? We may never know. It was likely a combination of all of these factors. The mystery is no longer a simple whodunit. It's a complex medical case. He wasn't a victim of a single assassin, but a victim of his own family's traditions, of disease, and of plain bad luck. But questions still remain. How exactly did he break his leg so badly if he wasn't riding a chariot? Was it just a simple fall that his weak bones couldn't withstand? Could his enemies, seeing his frail and sickly state, have simply decided to let nature take its course, or even helped the accident along? The boy king's death wasn't a simple murder, but it might not have been a simple accident either. Well, number one, who was buried in the wrong body? This is perhaps the strangest mystery of all. It involves two queens, two coffins, and a case of mistaken identity that lasted for 3,000 years. It started in the Valley of the Kings in tomb KV-21. The tomb was discovered in 1817, and it contained two female mummies, both without coffins or any identification. They were just known as KV-21A and KV-21B. For almost 200 years, they were footnotes in the history of the valley. Then came the 2010 DNA study on Tutankhamun's family. The scientists were trying to identify all of Tut's close relatives. They tested the DNA of the KV-21 mummies. The results for KV-21A were incredible. The DNA showed she was the mother of the two fetuses found in Tutankhamun's tomb. This means she was almost certainly Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's wife and half-sister. Finally, after centuries, the lost queen had been found. But then they looked at the body of KV-21A more closely. The mummy was badly damaged, but it was clear she had died in childbirth, or from complications shortly after. This fit the story of Ankhesenamun, who we know had at least two stillborn pregnancies. But then another researcher pointed out something strange about the mummification style. The way her arms were crossed A left over right, with hands open, was typical of the 19th dynasty, not the 18th dynasty when Ankhesenamun lived. It was a small detail, but a significant one. This is where the story connects to another mummy, a very famous one. In the Deir el-Bahri Kash, a coffin was found belonging to Queen Ahmose Meritamun, a queen from the early 18th dynasty. But the mummy inside the coffin was clearly not her. The embalming techniques were from a much later period, the 21st dynasty. This mummy was known as the unknown woman-see. A few years after the big DNA study, a new theory emerged that tied everything together. What if, during the chaotic reburials of the New Kingdom, when priests were moving mummies to protect them from robbers, a terrible mix-up happened? What if the body of Ankhesenamun was accidentally placed in the coffin of Queen Ahmose Meritamun, and the later period mummy unknown woman-see was put in her place and eventually ended up in KV-21? It's a complex theory of a body swap. If this is true, then the mummy we thought was Ankhesenamun, KV-21A, is actually an unknown woman from a later dynasty. And the real mummy of Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's tragic queen, is the one currently labeled Unknown Woman C, lying in the coffin of a different queen. It's a mystery that questions the very foundations of how we identify these ancient remains. The DNA says one thing, but the archaeological context and mummification style say another. It highlights how much we still don't know, and how easily the evidence can be misinterpreted. The entire story of Ankhesenamun's final days, her desperate letter to the Hittites, her forced marriage to Ai, her disappearance makes her one of the most compelling figures in Egyptian history. And we might have had her body all along, just under the wrong name. Is the mummy in KV-21A truly Ankhesenamun, despite the conflicting evidence? Or is she lying in a different coffin, waiting for science to finally give her back her name? And if it was a simple mistake by ancient priests, how many other royal mummies are not who we think they are? Could our entire understanding of the royal family trees be based on a series of ancient clerical errors?